They thought the handcuffs would tell the whole story. By 9:12 on a gray Tuesday morning, the marble floors of First Dominion Bank in downtown Baltimore were already echoing with the clipped rhythm of expensive shoes, polite greetings, and the low mechanical hum of money being counted behind reinforced glass, the kind of sound that usually made people feel safe, the kind of sound that suggested order, control, and trust. But safety has a strange way of disappearing when judgment walks in before truth does. Vanessa Brooks stepped through the front doors carrying a structured leather bag and the quiet composure of someone who did not need attention to command a room. She wore a navy pantsuit tailored to perfection, low black heels, and a silver watch that caught the morning light for only a second before disappearing beneath the cuff of her sleeve. Nothing about her asked to be noticed, and yet everything about her unsettled the people who believed they could tell who belonged in a place like that and who did not. At exactly 6 feet from the reception desk, she paused to take in the lobby with one slow glance. The chandeliers were polished. The display monitors were running promotional reels about trust and legacy. A mother stood near the coin machine with her young son. 2 businessmen waited by the private banking offices. An elderly man filled out a deposit slip with trembling hands. And behind the front counter, branch manager Linda Parker looked up, locked eyes with Vanessa, and smiled the kind of smile that never reached the soul. It lasted less than a second. Then it disappeared. Vanessa walked forward with calm purpose, her posture straight, her expression unreadable, but Linda's gaze followed her the way suspicion follows a person it has already decided to misunderstand. "Can I help you?" Linda asked, her tone polished, but too sharp around the edges to be called welcoming. Vanessa returned the look evenly. "I'm here for a scheduled review," she said. Her voice was low, clear, and steady, the kind of voice that did not rise just because someone else wanted control. Linda blinked once. "A review?" she repeated, as if the word itself sounded out of place. Coming from Vanessa. "That's right," Vanessa said. She did not elaborate. She did not need to. But in that silence, something old and ugly took shape in the room. Linda's fingers tightened around a pen. Her eyes flicked to Vanessa's bag, then to her shoes, then back to her face, measuring, sorting, deciding. "Do you have identification?" she asked. Vanessa held her gaze for a beat. "I do." The answer was simple, but before she could reach into her bag, Linda lifted a hand and gave a small signal toward the security desk. It was subtle enough that most people would have missed it. Vanessa did not. Neither did the guard in the gray blazer, who straightened immediately, touched the earpiece at his collar, and moved. A cold draft slipped in through the revolving door. Somewhere behind the teller line, a printer started spitting out paper. The little boy near the coin machine stopped talking. And just like that, the room changed. You could feel it before anyone said a word. That shift, that tightening, that quiet, familiar moment when a black woman stops being seen as a person and starts being treated like a problem. Vanessa remained still. Her breathing never changed. Her eyes moved once, briefly, toward the mirrored security dome in the corner, then back to Linda, whose voice had turned crisp with borrowed authority. "Ma'am," she said, louder now, enough for nearby customers to hear. "I'm going to need you to step away from the counter." Vanessa's face did not move. "On what grounds?" she asked. But Linda never answered. Because by then the doors had opened again, and 2 uniformed officers were already walking in, their radios crackling softly, their expressions hard, as if the story had already been written before they even heard her name. Officer Ethan Cole entered first, broad-shouldered, controlled, the kind of man who wore authority like it had been stitched into his skin. Officer Ryan Mercer followed half a step behind, younger, leaner, quieter, but no less ready to fall in line with whatever story the room had already handed them. Neither one looked confused. Neither one looked cautious. They looked certain, and certainty, when fed by bias, can become its own kind of danger. Ethan stopped 10 feet from Vanessa and planted his feet on the marble floor as if the entire bank now belonged to him. The lobby, so full of harmless sounds only moments earlier, had gone thin and brittle. The coin machine had gone silent. The printer behind the teller line had stopped mid-job. Even the little boy near the front had lowered his voice, watching with wide eyes the way children do when adults suddenly become strangers. Linda folded her arms and exhaled through her nose as though help had finally arrived to handle something beneath her. "This is the woman," she said, Not introducing Vanessa, not explaining, just offering her up like a problem to be removed. Ethan gave Vanessa a quick once-over, beginning with the bag at her side and ending at her face. "Ma'am," he said, in a tone that was formal only on the surface. "We need you to step away from the counter and keep your hands where I can see them." Vanessa did not move. "I asked a question," she said evenly. "On what grounds?" Ethan glanced once at Linda, then back at Vanessa, his expression flattening further. "We received a report of suspicious behavior," he said. "You came into a secure financial institution, refused to identify yourself, and were making staff uncomfortable." The words hung in the air, neat and official, almost clean enough to hide what they really meant. Vanessa looked at him with a stillness that would have unsettled anyone paying attention. "I did not refuse to identify myself," she said. "I said I had identification." Ryan shifted near the entrance, one hand resting near his belt, eyes moving between Vanessa and the gathering customers who were pretending not to stare. Ethan did not acknowledge her correction. He took one slow step forward. "Then produce it now." The command landed harder than it needed to. Vanessa could feel the room waiting for her to react. That was how moments like this often worked. Someone with power pushed. The room held its breath, and everyone silently decided whether your dignity would survive the next 10 seconds. She moved carefully, not out of fear, but because she knew men like Ethan often interpreted calm as defiance and precision as attitude. She lowered her hand toward her bag. Immediately, Ethan's voice sharpened. Slowly, the little boy's mother pulled him closer. One of the businessmen near the private offices took out his phone, then thought better of it, and slipped it back into his jacket. An elderly customer near the writing desk looked down at his slip, as if averting his eyes might excuse him from witnessing what was happening in plain sight. Vanessa unlatched her bag and reached inside with measured control. Before her hand could close around her wallet, Linda spoke again, louder this time, giving her fear the shape of accusation. "She was asking questions about internal access and restricted files," she said. "She claimed she had business here, but she would not show me anything." Vanessa lifted her eyes. There it was. The real move. Not confusion. Not caution. Construction. Brick by brick, lie by lie. The room was being invited to believe that professionalism in a black woman must be either fraud or threat. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Step away from the bag," he said. Vanessa let her hand rest where it was for one long second, then slowly withdrew it. "Officer," she said, her voice calm enough to make Linda even more uncomfortable. "You are escalating this without cause." Ethan gave a short, humorless laugh. "No, ma'am. I am containing it." And in that instant, before a single customer spoke, before anyone objected, before truth had even been given the chance to enter the conversation, the bank chose its side. Vanessa did not answer right away. She let the silence settle between them, not because she was unsure, but because she understood something neither Linda nor Officer Ethan Cole seemed to grasp. Silence has weight. In the wrong room, it becomes evidence against you. In the right hands, it becomes a mirror. Ethan mistook it for resistance. Linda mistook it for fear. But Vanessa was not afraid. Not in the way they wanted her to be. She had walked into rooms colder than this one. Rooms with polished smiles and hidden knives. Rooms where people said all the right words while deciding all the wrong things the moment she crossed the threshold. The bank lobby was only another version of the same old script, dressed in marble and brushed gold. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," Ethan said, his voice low and clipped, every syllable chosen to sound reasonable to the people listening. That was the danger of men like him. They knew how to perform control in a way that made witnesses doubt their own instincts. Vanessa lifted her chin just slightly. "No," she said. "I am asking you to slow down and think." Ryan Mercer glanced toward Ethan, then back to Vanessa, and for the first time something uncertain flickered across his face. It was faint, almost gone before it appeared, but it was there. He had expected panic, excuses, maybe anger. What he was seeing instead was a woman standing alone in the middle of a bank lobby with two officers in front of her and a room full of strangers behind her, yet somehow looking like the only person there who actually understood what was happening. Linda stepped forward from behind the counter, high heels tapping hard against the floor, confidence rising now that the uniforms had made the room bend in her favor. "Officers," she was asking about internal audits, compliance logs, restricted reports, she said. She kept speaking like she had the right to review them. Vanessa turned her eyes toward her. Calm, level, unblinking. Because I do. The words were simple, but they landed like something heavier. Linda gave a strained laugh, the kind people use when they need the room to reject reality before reality rejects them. You expect us to believe that? She asked. Vanessa did not look away. I do not need belief, she said. I need professionalism. A few feet away, the elderly man at the writing desk finally stopped pretending to fill out his slip. One of the tellers behind the glass lowered her eyes, then raised them again, unease written all over her face. The little boy near the front tugged softly on his mother's sleeve and whispered something no one else could hear. The mother did not answer. She just held his hand tighter. Ethan exhaled slowly, as if patience itself were something he was generously giving away. Ma'am, last warning, he said. Either you identify yourself right now and cooperate, or we will proceed accordingly. Vanessa heard the room shift around that sentence. That phrase, proceed accordingly, vague enough to sound lawful, heavy enough to sound threatening. It was always the same, she thought. The language of order used to justify disorder. The language of safety used to humiliate the wrong person in the right clothes. She could have ended it then. She could have reached into her bag, produced her identification, stated her full title, and watched the air change. But something in Linda's face stopped her. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. A flash of it. Small, fast, but unmistakable. Linda knew more than she was saying. Vanessa had seen that expression before in internal interviews, on faces that smiled through policy training and then altered records after hours. She had come to this branch because of missing transaction reports, irregular access logs, and a pattern of complaints that vanished before they reached the regional office. She had come quietly for a reason. And now, watching Linda push the officers forward while avoiding one specific locked office down the hall, Vanessa understood that the branch manager was not simply biased. She was cornered. Ethan took another step. Hands away from the bag, he said. Vanessa obeyed, but her eyes moved once, just once, toward the hallway beyond the customer service desks, where a frosted glass door stood closed under a silver sign that read, Authorized Personnel Only. She noticed the card reader. She noticed the blinking red light. And she noticed Linda notice her noticing it. That was when the branch manager's composure cracked. Only for a second. Only enough to confirm what Vanessa already suspected. This was never just about who they thought she was. It was about what they were afraid she might find. The temperature in the lobby seemed to drop even though no one had touched the thermostat. It was not the kind of cold that came from air conditioning. It was the colder thing, the thing that settles over a room when power begins to enjoy itself. Officer Ethan Cole extended his hand, palm open, not as an invitation, but as a command dressed up to look polite. Bag, he said. Vanessa Brooks looked at him for a long moment, her face composed, her shoulders square, her silence so controlled it almost seemed to disrupt the air around him. Then, with slow, deliberate care, she set the leather bag on the polished counter beside her. The metal clasp clicked softly, such a small sound, and yet every head in the lobby seemed to turn toward it. Ryan Mercer stepped in closer now, not touching her, but near enough to make the intent obvious. Linda Parker stood a few feet back, one arm folded over her waist, the other clutching her wrist so tightly the knuckles had gone pale. She wanted this over. No, not over. Contained. Buried. Whatever Vanessa had come for, Linda needed it stopped before it reached that locked hallway and the records behind it. Open it, Ethan said. Vanessa did not move. You have no basis to search my personal belongings without consent, she replied, each word crisp, measured, impossible to misunderstand. Ethan tilted his head slightly, the expression on his face halfway between irritation and amusement. I think I do, he said. You entered private property, refused to identify yourself, and alarmed staff while asking about sensitive systems. Vanessa's eyes flicked briefly toward Linda, and that was all it took. Linda straightened instantly. She was focused on internal files, she said, louder than necessary. Restricted access. Employee protocols. She would not tell me who authorized her visit. Vanessa drew a slow breath through her nose. The room was trying to become a witness against her. That was the trick of moments like these. One accusation spoken with confidence. One officer willing to turn discomfort into suspicion. One room willing to fill in the rest. She could feel every stare now, some curious, some embarrassed, some already convinced. The businessmen by the private offices had shifted their weight, but said nothing. The tellers behind the glass pretended to organize papers they had stopped reading minutes ago. The elderly man by the deposit slips was no longer writing at all. And near the coin machine, the little boy whispered to his mother, "Why are they being mean to her?" His voice was soft, but in the hush of that lobby, it landed like truth too innocent to be filtered. His mother shushed him quickly, eyes lowered, shoulders tightening with the helplessness of someone who knew exactly what he meant and exactly why she could not say it out loud. Ethan heard it too. A shadow crossed his face, but only for a second. Then he turned that discomfort back into procedure. "Ma'am," he said, the word flattening into something cold. "Turn around." Linda's lips parted, and Vanessa caught it, that tiny exhale of relief, as though the whole scene had finally crossed into the version of events she had been hoping for. Ryan hesitated. It was slight, little more than a pause in his breathing, but Vanessa noticed. He had expected defiance by now. He had expected anger. He had expected someone easier to label. What stood before him instead was a woman who looked less like a threat than anyone else in the room, and yet somehow more certain than all of them combined. "Officer," Vanessa said quietly, her eyes fixed on Ethan, "if you do this, make sure you remember every detail." The sentence did not sound like a threat. It sounded worse. It sounded like a record. Ethan's jaw hardened. He took a step closer. "Turn around," he repeated. Vanessa looked past him for the briefest moment, beyond the front doors, where traffic moved along Charles Street in slow late-morning lines, where ordinary people carried coffee cups and briefcases and had no idea that inside this polished bank, a woman was being measured not by what she had done, but by how quickly a room had decided she did not belong. Then she looked back at Ethan, calm as ever, and without another word, she slowly turned. The lobby did not erupt. That was what made it worse. No one shouted. No one stepped in. No one said this had gone too far. The humiliation settled quietly, like dust on polished stone, coating everything without needing to announce itself. Vanessa Brooks stood facing the counter, hands visible, shoulders still, while Officer Ethan Cole moved behind her with the calm confidence of a man certain the room would protect him from ever having to question himself. Ryan Mercer remained to her left, close enough to reinforce the picture, far enough to avoid looking like the one in charge. Linda Parker said nothing now. She did not need to. The scene had already become what she wanted it to be. A black woman in a bank lobby, surrounded by uniforms, treated like a disruption before she had been treated like a human being. Somewhere near the front windows, a customer cleared his throat and looked away. The sound was small, but in the hush that followed it, every movement felt magnified. Vanessa could hear the faint rattle of the air vent above the teller line. She could hear the scrape of a chair from one of the offices down the hall. She could hear the child near the coin machine breathing harder now, confused in the way only children are when they witness adults calling unfairness by a different name. Ethan spoke near her shoulder, his voice low and practiced. "Do not make this more difficult." Vanessa did not turn her head. "That depends on whether difficulty means truth," she said. Ryan looked down for half a second. Ethan did not respond. There was a soft metallic sound behind her, followed by the brief pressure of procedure becoming public. It was not pain that moved through the room. It was theater. That was what made people stare. Not danger. Not proof. Theater. The visible symbol that told everyone present the story had been decided. Vanessa felt the shift instantly. The businessmen by the private banking offices straightened as if the scene now made sense. One teller behind the glass lowered her gaze completely. The elderly man by the writing desk closed his pen and set it down with a hand that trembled just slightly. And Linda, standing 3 feet away with her spine finally relaxing, exhaled as though she had just survived something rather than caused it. Imagine standing there, dressed for work, carrying your credentials, walking into a place tied to your own authority, only to watch strangers accept your humiliation because it arrived in an official tone. Imagine hearing your own voice stay steady while the room around you quietly agrees to misunderstand you. Vanessa kept her breathing even. She did not argue. She did not plead. She only lifted her eyes to the mirrored security dome again and let her gaze rest there for a second longer than before. Ethan noticed. "You need to focus on me," he said. Vanessa answered without emotion. "I am focused on everyone." The words unsettled him, though he tried not to show it. Ryan shifted his stance. His eyes moved from Vanessa to Linda, then toward the restricted hallway at the back, and for the first time the younger officer looked less certain that this was routine. Linda caught that look and stepped in quickly, eager to keep control from slipping. "Officers, I would like her removed from the customer area," she said. "Our clients are frightened." Vanessa almost smiled at the choice of words. Frightened, not uncomfortable, not confused, not witnessing misconduct. Frightened. Language was everything in rooms like this. One word could turn prejudice into policy. One phrase could make cruelty sound necessary. Ethan nodded. "Ma'am, we are moving to a more secure area." Vanessa turned her head just enough to look at him from the corner of her eye. "Secure for whom?" she asked. He did not answer. Of course he did not. Because the truth was already beginning to move beneath the surface. And truth has a way of making people rush when they should stop. As Ethan guided her away from the counter, Vanessa caught one more thing. A teller near the far station, a woman in her 50s with silver-framed glasses and a name tag that read Denise, was staring not at Vanessa, but at Linda. Not with fear, with recognition, with doubt. Denise knew something. Vanessa saw it in the tight line of her mouth, in the way her hand hovered above the keyboard without pressing a key, in the way she looked toward the locked hallway, and then quickly backed down. And just like that, while the lobby kept pretending this was about order, Vanessa understood that the first crack in Linda Parker's story had already appeared. They led Vanessa Brooks past the customer service desks and toward a glass-walled office near the back of the lobby, not quite private, not quite public, the kind of space designed to make authority feel official without ever becoming accountable. The frosted panel on the door read, "Consultation Room B," though there was nothing consultative about the way Officer Ethan Cole opened it, or the way Linda Parker lingered just outside like a woman trying to make sure a fire stayed contained to one room. Ryan Mercer stepped in last and closed the door behind them, but the glass still left everything visible in outline. Shapes moved beyond the frosted band. Faces paused and pretended not to. Vanessa took in the room in one sweep. 2 leather chairs, a polished walnut desk, a tray with untouched bottled water, a framed print of the harbor at sunset hanging crooked by less than an inch. Small details, ordinary details, except ordinary details were often where people hid the truth. Ethan gestured toward the chair opposite the desk. "Sit." Vanessa sat without protest, posture straight, wrists still joined in front of her, expression composed enough to make the entire situation feel smaller than it was. That, more than anything, unsettled Ethan. He remained standing for a second longer, then positioned himself between her and the door, as though placement alone could prove control. Ryan stayed off to the side, notebook in hand, though he had not written a word yet. Linda hovered just outside the glass, visible as a narrow silhouette, phone pressed to her ear. Vanessa watched her reflection shift in the pane and filed it away. "Name," Ethan said. Vanessa looked at him. "You still have not given me a legal reason for detaining me." Ethan leaned one hand on the desk. "I am giving you an opportunity to cooperate before this gets worse." Vanessa's eyes moved to the bottle of water nearest the edge of the desk, then to the paper calendar beneath a glass cover, then to the stack of forms tucked inside a side tray. Deposit dispute forms, currency transaction reports, incident logs. One folder was out of line by half an inch, as if someone had shoved it away in a hurry and missed the edge. Across the tab, barely visible from where she sat, was a date from the prior week and a red stamp that read internal review pending. "Interesting. Worse," she repeated quietly. "That depends on whether your report survives comparison with the cameras." Ryan finally looked up. From his blank notebook, Ethan's face hardened. "You seem very confident for someone in your position." Vanessa met his eyes with a calm that gave nothing away. "That is because I understand my position better than you do." Outside the room, Linda stopped pacing and turned sharply toward the restricted hallway again. Even through the frosted band, Vanessa could see the tension in her shoulders. Denise, the teller with silver-framed glasses, appeared briefly beyond the glass carrying a file box, but she slowed when she passed, her face angled just enough to confirm what Vanessa had already sensed. Denise knew the branch had been under quiet review. Maybe not the full scope, but enough to know Linda was lying. Ethan pulled out the chair across from Vanessa and sat down at last. lowering his voice as if intimacy might accomplish what force had not. "Let me make this simple," he said. "Who are you, and why were you asking about restricted records?" Vanessa let a beat pass. Then another. She could hear the faint buzz of Linda's voice through the door, sharp and hurried, speaking to someone who was not calming her down. She could hear a teller drawer open and close in the lobby. She could hear the building itself, the hidden rhythm of a branch trying to keep functioning while panic spread beneath the carpet. "I asked about compliance logs, account access, and audit routing," Vanessa said at last. "Because your branch manager reacted to my presence before she asked my name." Ethan frowned. "That is not an answer." "It is the beginning of one," Vanessa replied. Then she tilted her head slightly toward the glass wall. "And if I were you, I would ask Ms. Parker who she has been calling for the past 4 minutes. Ryan turned instinctively toward the door. Ethan did not. But the smallest change crossed his face, a hairline fracture in all that certainty. For the first time since entering the bank, he was no longer leading the moment. He was trying to catch up to it. The fracture became visible the moment the phone rang. Not Vanessa's phone. Not Ethan's. The line at Linda Parker's desk out in the lobby, the direct internal line reserved for branch priority calls, began, ringing with a sharp, relentless tone that sliced through the muffled quiet outside consultation room B. Once, twice, 3 times. Linda froze. Even through the frosted glass, Vanessa could see the hesitation lock into her posture. There are calls people ignore because they are busy, and there are calls people fear because they already know what waits on the other end. This was the second kind. Ryan Mercer turned first, his attention pulled to the sound before his mind could catch up. Ethan remained seated across from Vanessa, trying to hold on to the shape of authority he had built around himself, but his eyes flicked toward the glass all the same. Linda rushed back toward the desk, heels striking the marble in short, urgent beats. Through the blurred pane, Vanessa watched her snatch up the receiver. The change was immediate. Linda said 1 word, maybe 2, then went still. Completely still. The kind of stillness that does not come from listening, but from impact. Ethan rose from his chair. "What now?" he muttered, not really to anyone. Vanessa leaned back slightly, calm as ever, wrists still joined before her, her face unreadable except for the faintest trace of recognition. She had been expecting movement from headquarters the moment her check-in window closed. She had built that margin herself. 8 minutes without confirmation. Then escalation. 12 minutes. Then executive contact. She had walked into this branch with quiet timing, not hope. "Officer," she said softly, "you may want to open that door." Ethan looked at her, and for the first time since this started, there was no confidence in his expression, only irritation mixed with something thinner, more unstable. "Do not tell me how to do my job." Vanessa held his gaze. "Then do not let someone else's mistake become yours." Outside, Linda's voice rose, not loud enough to make out words, but strained enough to change the air. Ryan moved to the door before Ethan said anything and opened it a few inches. The lobby came rushing back in all at once. The hum of fluorescent lights. The murmur of customers pretending not to listen. The clipped panic in Linda's tone. "Yes, she is here," Linda was saying, one hand pressed against the desk so hard her shoulders had started to shake. "No, I was not informed. No, she did not identify herself properly. I had a situation and followed procedure." Vanessa closed her eyes for one brief second. There it was. Not confusion. Not apology. Self-protection. Linda was still trying to frame the scene before the truth fully entered the room. Then another voice cut through the receiver, loud enough now that even Ryan heard part of it from where he stood. The reaction on his face said enough. He opened the door wider. Ethan stepped into the threshold just as Linda turned, pale and tight-lipped, the phone still at her ear. Every customer in the lobby had gone quiet again. Even the child near the front had stopped whispering. Denise stood behind the far teller station with both hands resting flat on the counter, watching as if she had finally reached the moment she knew was coming but never believed she would see. Linda swallowed. "The call is from corporate executive operations," she said, and the words sounded strange in her mouth, like they belonged to a different reality than the one she had been trying to stage. Ethan frowned. "About what?" Linda stared at him as though the answer itself might save her if she delayed it long enough. It did not. About her. 2 officers. A branch manager. A lobby full of witnesses. And in the center of it all, The woman they had treated like an intruder rose slowly from the chair and stepped forward into full view behind the glass. Ryan looked at Vanessa, then at the cuffs at her wrists, and something inside him finally gave way. Not loyalty. Illusion. Ethan did not move, but the room around him had already begun to. One of the businessmen by private banking took off his glasses. The elderly man near the writing desk straightened his back. Denise lowered her head for half a second, then looked up again with the kind of quiet vindication that does not need words. Linda held the phone out with a trembling hand. They asked to speak to Director Brooks. And just like that, the room did not change all at once. It changed person by person, face by face, breath by breath, as the truth moved across it, and every assumption that had stood so tall just minutes earlier began to collapse under its own shame. For one suspended second, nobody moved. The words Director Brooks seemed to hang over the marble floor like a bell that had been struck too hard to ignore. Vanessa stepped forward from consultation room B with the same measured composure she had carried into the bank, but now the room was seeing that composure differently. A few minutes earlier they had mistaken it for defiance. Now it looked like what it had always been. Authority. Ethan Cole stared at the cuffs at her wrists as if they had become unfamiliar objects. Ryan Mercer was the first to recover enough to act. He stepped closer, voice low, almost careful now. "Ma'am," he said, and this time the words sounded like respect instead of control. Vanessa held out her hands without a word. The metal was removed quickly, and the sound it made was small, almost embarrassingly small, compared to the weight it had carried a moment before. Vanessa rubbed one wrist once, not dramatically, not to draw pity, only to restore circulation and dignity in the same quiet motion. Then she took the phone from Linda Parker's trembling hand. "Vanessa Brooks speaking," she said. Her voice was calm, professional, and exact, the voice of someone stepping back into the place she had never truly left. The lobby had gone so still that even the distant traffic outside seemed louder than the people inside. Those nearest the front desk could hear only Vanessa's side of the conversation, but that was enough. "Yes, I am on site," she said. "Yes." The branch manager initiated police intervention before confirming identity. "Yes, customer-facing. Multiple witnesses." Linda flinched at each phrase as though every word were another official stamp sealing her fate. Ethan stood rigid, his jaw set, but his certainty was gone now. It had drained out of him the moment the room stopped supporting his assumptions. Vanessa listened for several seconds, eyes moving once across the lobby, taking in every face, every lowered gaze. Every person suddenly discovering the floor was fascinating. "Understood," she said at last. "Please notify compliance, corporate, security, and regional human resources. No one leaves management offices until records are secured." When she handed the phone back, Linda did not take it immediately. Her fingers hovered in the air, unsure now even of simple movements. Vanessa set the receiver gently onto the counter instead. "Ms. Parker," she said, turning fully toward her. "You were informed last Friday that a live internal review could occur at any point this week without prior branch notice." Linda's mouth opened, then closed. "I did not know it was you," she said, and even as the words came out, everyone heard how small they were, how helpless, how useless against what had already happened. Vanessa's eyes did not harden. That would have been easier for everyone in the room. Instead, they stayed steady, disappointed in a way that forced people to face themselves. "You did not ask," she replied. The sentence landed harder than anger would have. Denise behind the teller station lowered her head for a brief moment, then looked back up, lips pressed tight, as though holding in months of things she had never been safe enough to say. Vanessa turned to Ethan and Ryan next. She did not raise her voice. She did not shame them for the audience they had already created. "Officers, you responded to a report," she said. "What you choose to write after this moment will determine whether this becomes negligence or something more deliberate." Ryan nodded once, the color rising in his face. Ethan said nothing, but silence sounds different when power is no longer behind it. Around them, the lobby was changing shape. The businessmen by private banking no longer looked entertained or curious. The elderly man near the writing desk stood straighter, no longer avoiding the scene, but witnessing it. The mother by the coin machine pulled her son closer, and this time when he looked up at her with confusion, she did not shush him. She just held him and watched. Vanessa reached for her leather bag, opened it, and finally withdrew the identification no one had let her present. A sleek corporate badge. Regional Director. Audit and Compliance Operations. She placed it on the counter in full view of everyone. No one gasped. Real shame does not need sound. Then she looked toward the restricted hallway, where the blinking red card reader waited beside the frosted glass door like a secret that had run out of time. Now, she said, her voice quiet but carrying across the lobby with absolute command. We are going to finish the review you tried so hard to stop. The restricted hallway felt different the moment Vanessa Brooks stepped toward it. Not because the walls changed or the lighting softened or the air suddenly became easier to breathe, but because truth had entered ahead of everyone else and stripped the place of its disguise. What had looked like polished order now looked like what it had been all along. A system leaning on appearance, hoping no one with the right authority and the right patience would ever look closely enough to see the cracks. Vanessa lifted her badge to the card reader beside the frosted glass door. The light flashed from red to green with a soft click, and that tiny sound carried through the hallway like judgment. Behind her, Linda Parker stopped breathing for a second. Ethan Cole and Ryan Mercer remained just outside the threshold, no longer directing anything, no longer sure where to put their hands or their eyes. Denise stood near the teller line in full view now, no longer hiding her attention, because once the truth has been named, pretending becomes harder for everyone. Vanessa pushed the door open and stepped inside. The records room was colder than the lobby, lined with metal cabinets, archived files, and two locked terminals glowing against the far wall. A shred bin sat half full beside a desk. A stack of printed reports rested under a paperweight that had not been there by accident. Vanessa moved through the room with quiet precision, opening one file drawer, then another, eyes scanning dates, initials, routing stamps, access times. Linda lingered in the doorway at first, then followed when Vanessa said, without turning around, "Stay where I can see you." Again, no raised voice. Again, no performance. Just authority spoken in its natural language. Within minutes, the pattern emerged with the kind of clarity that only guilty people ever believe they can outsmart. Missing transaction alerts had been rerouted. Complaint records had been altered after submission. Internal audit flags had been delayed, misclassified, or buried under false notes. And most revealing of all, a set of access logs showed Linda's credentials entering secured review files after midnight on 3 separate occasions, each one followed by erased comment histories and amended routing trails. Vanessa placed one folder on the desk and opened it flat. This branch was not suffering from confusion, she said. It was being managed through concealment. Linda's face drained of what little color she had left. I was under pressure, she whispered. The numbers were off. Regional targets were impossible. I was trying to protect the branch. Vanessa looked at her then, really looked at her, and in that silence Linda seemed to shrink under the weight of being fully seen. You were trying to protect yourself, Vanessa said. And when I walked in, you decided my face was the easiest shield you could find. Outside the records room, the hallway had gone silent again. Ryan had stepped closer, not intruding, just listening now with the posture of a man realizing that harm does not always announce itself with raised voices. Sometimes it arrives in paperwork, in assumptions, in the speed with which a person is treated like a threat instead of a witness. Ethan stood farther back, shoulders rigid, expression unreadable except for one thing. He knew, maybe not everything, maybe not every file or every altered report, but he knew that the moment he had chosen certainty over fairness, he had stopped being part of the solution and become part of the damage. Vanessa closed the folder and handed it to Denise, who had been called in by corporate security and now stood in the doorway with cautious hands and shining eyes. This goes directly to compliance, Vanessa said. Denise nodded once, gripping the file like it mattered, because it did. Every altered page, every erased flag, every quiet decision made in a back office and disguised as standard procedure. By early afternoon, corporate security had arrived. Linda Parker was placed on immediate administrative leave pending formal investigation. Her access was revoked on site. The branch terminals were frozen for review. Statements were taken from staff. Denise spoke carefully but truthfully. The elderly customer from the lobby left his phone number with human resources in case witness confirmation was needed. Even the mother near the coin machine had stayed long enough to describe what she saw. Because sometimes ordinary people finally understand that silence does not keep peace. It only protects the wrong side. As for the officers, Ryan removed himself from the lobby long enough to begin his report from the patrol car. And when he returned, his face carried the sober stillness of someone who had written the facts without hiding behind the usual language. Ethan took longer. Pride usually does. But before Vanessa left, he approached her near the front entrance where the gray afternoon light was slanting across the marble floor, and the bank, for the first time all day, felt honest in its quiet. "Director Brooks," he said, voice stripped of the tone he had walked in with. "I made assumptions I should not have made." Vanessa held his gaze. "No," she said gently, but with enough force to leave no place to hide. "You acted on assumptions you should have questioned." He lowered his eyes for a moment, and in that brief silence there was no badge large enough to protect him from the truth. Vanessa picked up her bag and turned toward the doors. The mother by the coin machine was gone. The child was gone. The businessmen were gone. Linda was gone from the counter where she had once stood, so certain of her control. All that remained was the echo of what the room had revealed about itself. At the entrance, Vanessa paused and looked back once, not at the cameras, not at the marble, not at the uniforms or the desks or the locked offices. She looked at the people, at Denise, at Ryan, at Ethan, at the tellers who had watched and learned how fast dignity can be taken when prejudice gets there first. Then she said the one sentence that would stay in that branch longer than any report, longer than any investigation, longer than the memory of who wore authority that morning. A title did not make me worthy of respect, she said. It only exposed who never believed I deserved it without one. And when she stepped out onto Charles Street, the city moved around her the way cities always do, traffic rolling, coffee cooling in paper cups, strangers passing without knowing what had just been broken open inside that bank. But some truths do not need an audience to matter. Some justice does not arrive with sirens or speeches. Sometimes it walks in quietly, carries itself with dignity, and waits for a room to reveal what it really is. They thought they were judging a woman. What they were really exposing was themselves.